History is usually written by survivors, but sometimes history is written by those who barely survived at all. Long before laboratories, satellites, or written science, ancient peoples recorded moments when the world seemed to break. Cities erased, landscapes transformed, entire populations forced to start over. Modern readers often call these accounts symbolic, exaggerated, or theological. Yet beneath the ground, something strange keeps appearing. Collapsed cities with no signs of long warfare. Sediment layers showing sudden floods where none should exist. Ancient names carved in stone, names scholars once claimed were imaginary. And slowly, a different question begins to form. What if some ancient stories were not designed to explain the universe, but to warn future generations about what the world is capable of? Not prophecy, not myth, but memory, preserved the only way it could be. Welcome to Hidden Origins. This is a place for quiet questions and forgotten evidence. Let's continue. Modern society treats history as a timeline, dates, rulers, wars, and documents arranged in a clean sequence. Ancient societies did not experience history that way. For them, history was not something to be recorded for curiosity. It was something to be preserved for survival. Before paper, before widespread literacy, and before scientific measurement, civilizations relied on memory. Events that threatened existence itself were not archived, they were transformed into stories strong enough to survive generations of retelling. These narratives were not written to be precise, they were written to be unforgettable. This distinction matters. When modern audiences dismiss ancient accounts as myth, they often apply a standard that never existed. Ancient writers were not journalists. They were witnesses trying to ensure that future generations remembered what had nearly destroyed them. Archaeology has quietly revealed a repeating pattern across the ancient world. Long periods of stable human settlement are interrupted by sudden destruction. Cities that thrived for centuries show no signs of gradual decline, only abrupt collapse. Walls crushed inward, buildings burned simultaneously, and entire populations disappearing from the record. For decades, these findings were explained in isolation, a local conflict here, a natural disaster there. But when similar destruction layers appear across multiple regions, the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Ancient texts often describe these moments using symbolic or moral language. Collapse is framed as judgment, warning, or consequence. Modern readers fixate on the symbolism and miss the signal beneath it. Something catastrophic occurred, and it permanently altered the lives of those who witnessed it. This is where modern science becomes relevant, not to prove belief, but to measure impact. Geology identifies rapid environmental shifts. Archaeology documents mass abandonment. Anthropology tracks sudden cultural change. Together, they suggest that ancient societies were responding to real, destabilizing events. One of the most misunderstood features of ancient storytelling is exaggeration. In modern thinking, exaggeration implies falsehood. In oral cultures, exaggeration ensured accuracy. The more severe the event, the stronger the story needed to be to survive time. Floods illustrate this clearly. In early river civilizations, flooding did not mean inconvenience. It meant famine, disease, migration, and social collapse. To survivors, the world did not partially flood, it ended. When these experiences were passed down, they were remembered as total destruction, not because the description was scientifically exact, but because it was emotionally and culturally true. Scale also matters. Ancient societies had no global awareness. A regional catastrophe could erase everything they knew. When texts describe the destruction of the whole world, they often mean the destruction of their world. Modern readers interpret these phrases literally and dismiss them. Ancient audiences understood them instinctively. This gap in understanding has caused generations to underestimate ancient memory. Yet the ground itself increasingly confirms that these stories align with physical evidence, just not in modern language. The question is not whether ancient narratives sound scientific. The question is why so many of them describe the same kinds of collapse, and why the Earth keeps remembering them. As scholars began comparing ancient accounts across different regions, something unexpected emerged. Cultures separated by geography, language, and time were describing remarkably similar disruptions. Not identical stories, but similar experiences encoded in different symbolic systems. Civilizations that had no contact with one another spoke of sudden environmental change, forced migration, and the collapse of social order. These were not philosophical myths about creation. They were stories about interruption, about life before and life after something went wrong. Archaeological records confirm that early human settlements were far more fragile than modern societies. Cities depended on predictable seasons, stable water sources, and limited trade networks. When any one of these systems failed, collapse followed quickly. What makes this significant is not that disasters happened. Disasters always happen. What matters is how often ancient societies describe them as abrupt, overwhelming, and transformative. Geological research shows that the ancient world experienced periods of rapid climate instability. Rivers changed course, coastlines shifted, earthquakes reshaped entire regions, volcanic eruptions darkened skies and altered weather patterns for years. To modern science, these are data points. To ancient people, they were existential events. When food systems collapsed, people moved. When people moved, cultures collided, languages blended, traditions changed, and social hierarchies broke apart. Entire belief systems were rewritten to explain a new reality. This helps explain why so many ancient narratives focus on order being disrupted and then restored. These stories were not abstract moral lessons. They reflected lived experience, chaos followed by adaptation. One of the strongest indicators that ancient narratives preserve real events is consistency of consequence. When texts describe catastrophe, they often also describe population decline, loss of technology, or long-term societal change. Archaeology confirms these outcomes repeatedly. Settlements shrink, craftsmanship declines, trade routes disappear. These are not symbolic effects, they are measurable. In some regions, once advanced cities were replaced by smaller, simpler communities for generations. Writing systems vanished, architectural complexity decreased, knowledge was lost and later rediscovered. Ancient storytellers remembered these periods as dark ages, not because they lacked intelligence, but because survival replaced innovation. Another pattern emerges when examining leadership narratives. Many ancient texts emphasize failed rulers, ignored warnings, or internal corruption before collapse. Modern readers interpret this as moral storytelling, but political instability is one of the most reliable precursors to societal failure. When leadership fails during environmental stress, collapse accelerates. This pattern is well documented in modern history as well. The difference is that modern societies record it through statistics. Ancient societies recorded it through story. Importantly, ancient narratives rarely glorify catastrophe. They treat it as loss. Even when framed symbolically, destruction is something to be remembered with caution, not celebration. This suggests these stories were not invented to inspire awe. They were preserved to prevent repetition. Memory was protection. When later generations heard these stories, they were not being entertained, they were being informed about boundaries, limits, and consequences. Modern audiences often assume ancient peoples exaggerated because they lacked scientific understanding. In reality, ancient societies understood their environment intimately. Their survival depended on it. They observed patterns across generations and encoded them into narrative warnings. What modern science is now doing with instruments and models, ancient societies did with memory and mythic structure. The difference lies not in intelligence, but in medium. When science and archaeology revisit these ancient accounts without dismissing them outright, a clearer picture forms. These narratives do not describe random fantasy. They describe humanity responding to a volatile world with the tools available at the time. And those tools worked because we are still hearing the stories. As the evidence accumulates, it becomes harder to argue that ancient narratives are meaningless. They may not be literal in every detail, but they are precise in what matters most: disruption, loss, and survival. And this raises a deeper question. If ancient stories preserved memory of past collapses, what were they trying to prepare us for? As patterns across archaeology, geology, and ancient memory emerge, an uncomfortable tension begins to surface. If ancient societies repeatedly recorded collapse with such consistency, then the question is no longer whether these events happened, but how close they came to erasing everything. Human civilization has never been as stable as it appears in hindsight. What we call continuity is often survival after near failure. Beneath long timelines lie narrow margins, moments when a few variables shifted and entire systems unraveled. Ancient narratives reflect this fragility with surprising clarity. They describe societies that believed themselves secure, advanced, and protected until conditions changed faster than adaptation could follow. When order failed, it did so suddenly. Archaeological layers confirm this speed. In many ancient cities, there is no evidence of prolonged decline. Infrastructure does not gradually decay. Instead, habitation stops, tools are left behind, homes are abandoned mid-use. Whatever happened, people did not have time to prepare. This abruptness challenges modern assumptions. We often imagine collapse as slow and predictable. Ancient memory suggests otherwise. Environmental stress rarely acts alone. It intersects with human decisions, overuse of land, rigid hierarchies, ignored warnings, and delayed response. Ancient texts frequently encode this insight through narratives of refusal, disbelief, or misplaced confidence. Modern readers interpret these elements as moral lessons, but from a systems perspective, they describe governance failure under stress. When leaders deny environmental reality, collapse accelerates. Anthropological studies show that societies which adapt early to environmental change often survive. Those that resist change because it threatens existing power structures do not. Ancient storytellers understood this intuitively. They preserved stories where warnings were given but dismissed, not to preach, but to remember what happens when adaptation is delayed. Another tension arises when considering scale. Ancient societies had no redundancy. Food systems were local. Trade networks were fragile. A single drought, flood, or seismic event could ripple outward and destabilize everything. When these shocks occurred, people did not simply lose resources, they lost meaning. Religious frameworks, political authority, and social order were all tied to environmental stability. When the land failed, belief systems fractured alongside it. This may explain why ancient narratives often combine physical catastrophe with spiritual crisis. To modern audiences, this blending seems irrational. To ancient societies, it was inseparable. Reality and meaning collapsed together. One of the most striking patterns is what follows destruction. Ancient texts rarely end with extinction. They end with survival, smaller, humbled, and changed. Archaeology supports this as well. After collapse, cultures re-emerge in simplified forms. Technology regresses. Architecture becomes modest. Population density decreases. Innovation pauses. These are not signs of ignorance. They are signs of recovery. Survival required focus, not expansion. This challenges the modern assumption that progress is inevitable. Ancient memory suggests progress is conditional. It depends on environmental balance, social flexibility, and leadership willing to respond to warning signs. What makes this tension uncomfortable is its relevance. The same forces that shaped ancient collapse, climate instability, resource stress, and political rigidity, are not relics of the past. They are recurring features of human civilization. Ancient stories endure not because they are dramatic, but because they encode patterns that repeat. This does not mean ancient societies predicted the future. It means they recognized limits. Their stories functioned as boundary markers, reminders that human systems operate within environmental constraints. When those constraints are ignored, collapse follows, regardless of belief, intelligence, or technological level. Modern science often treats ancient narratives as primitive attempts to explain the world, yet increasingly, those narratives appear to be records of what happens when complex systems exceed their margins. The tension lies here. If ancient people preserved memory of collapse to warn the future, then forgetting those memories may be the most dangerous mistake of all. Because the Earth does not reset its rules. Only human memory does.
When ancient societies looked back on collapse, they rarely described it as random. They described it as something that followed a sequence, conditions ignored, limits crossed, stability lost. Not punishment in a theological sense, but consequence in the most human sense. What survived from those worlds was not power or expansion. What survived was memory. This is why ancient narratives endure across cultures and centuries. They are not attempts to impress the future. They are attempts to reach it. They preserve moments when human systems encountered forces larger than themselves and failed to adapt in time. Modern science now offers tools ancient people never had. Satellites track climate patterns, models predict stress points, data quantifies risk. Yet the broad conclusions increasingly echo what ancient memory already recorded. Complex systems are fragile, and stability is conditional. The past was not naive, it was observant. Ancient societies paid attention to their environment because survival demanded it. They noticed when rivers shifted, when seasons became unpredictable,
when land no longer produced what it once had. They observed how leadership responded under pressure and what happened when warnings were dismissed. These observations were not written as charts or equations. They were encoded as stories strong enough to survive centuries of retelling. Not because stories were inaccurate, but because stories last. One of the most revealing details in ancient narratives is how rarely collapse is celebrated. Even when described symbolically, destruction is portrayed as loss. Knowledge disappears, cities fall silent, skills vanish. Recovery is slow, cautious, and incomplete. Archaeology confirms this again and again. After collapse, societies do not immediately rebuild what they lost. They simplify. They focus on survival. Innovation pauses. Progress retreats.
This challenges a deeply modern assumption that advancement is permanent. Ancient memory suggests otherwise. Progress is not guaranteed. It depends on balance, restraint, and responsiveness to change. When systems grow beyond what their environment can support, collapse is not dramatic, it is inevitable. This is why ancient narratives often end not with dominance, but with humility. Survivors emerge altered, more aware of limits, less confident in permanence. These are not religious conclusions, they are experiential ones. What makes this perspective uncomfortable is its familiarity. The forces that shaped ancient collapse, environmental instability, resource stress, political rigidity, are not confined to the past. They are recurring features of human civilization. Ancient societies did not preserve these stories to predict the future. They preserved them to remember the past accurately enough to avoid repeating it. Whether or not that memory is effective depends on whether it is heard. Modern culture often treats ancient narratives as obsolete, interesting, symbolic, but irrelevant. Yet archaeology and science increasingly show that these stories align with real-world patterns that continue to shape civilizations. The Earth records these patterns through layers of stone, ash, and sediment. Humanity records them through narrative. When these two records are compared, not forced to agree, but allowed to inform one another, a deeper understanding emerges. Ancient stories are not relics of superstition. They are early models of human response to instability. They remind us that civilization is not defined by how high it builds, but by how well it adapts. The greatest mistake any society can make is believing it exists outside history, that it has progressed beyond limits, that it is immune to the forces that reshaped the past. Ancient memory exists to challenge that belief, not with fear, not with prophecy, but with perspective. Because history does not repeat itself as spectacle. It repeats itself as pattern, and patterns do not vanish when ignored. They wait for the moment when memory is needed again.